The yellow piece of paper stuck to her apartment door felt like a death sentence. Amy stared at the bold black letters that spelled out eviction notice and felt her stomach drop. 30 days. That's all she had left before she'd be homeless. She pulled the notice down with shaking hands and walked into her tiny one-bedroom apartment. The place that had once felt like home now felt like a prison. Medical bills covered her kitchen table like fallen leaves. Each envelope contained another reminder of how much money she owed for her mother's cancer treatments. Amy had been a teacher for 3 years before everything fell apart. When her mother got sick 6 months ago, Amy had to take time off work. First, it was just a few days here and there for doctor appointments. Then it became weeks when her mom needed someone to drive her to chemotherapy sessions. Eventually, the school had to let her go. They were understanding, but they needed someone who could be there every day. Now she was working 2 part-time jobs just to pay for groceries and her mother's medications. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The medical bills kept coming, and each one was bigger than the last. Her credit cards were maxed out. She'd already borrowed money from every friend who would listen. Even her savings account, which had taken her years to build up, was completely empty. Amy sat down at her kitchen table and pulled out a calculator. She did the math for the 100th time, hoping somehow the numbers would be different. They weren't. Even if she worked every single day for the next year, she still wouldn't have enough money to pay everything she owed. That's when she remembered what her coworker Lisa had mentioned last week. Lisa worked at the coffee shop downtown, and she'd heard about something unusual from one of her regular customers. A businessman was looking for someone to marry him so he could stay in the country. It wasn't a real marriage, Lisa had said, just paperwork. The man would pay $50,000 for someone willing to go through with it for 2 years. At the time, Amy had laughed it off. Who would do something so crazy? But now, staring at all these bills, the idea didn't seem so crazy anymore. $50,000 would pay off her mother's medical debt and keep her apartment. It would give her time to find a real job again. Amy found Lisa's phone number and called her. Her hands were sweating as she waited for Lisa to pick up. "Hey Amy, what's up?" Lisa's voice was cheerful. "That thing you mentioned last week, about the businessman looking for someone to marry. Were you serious about that?" There was a pause. "Yeah, I was serious. Why? You're not actually thinking about it, are you?" "I might be. Do you know how I could get in touch with him?" Lisa gave her a phone number and the name of a lawyer who was handling everything. "Amy, are you sure about this? I mean, I know things are tough, but marrying a complete stranger, I don't have any other choice," Amy said quietly. After she hung up, Amy stared at the phone number Lisa had given her. She thought about her mother, who was probably at home right now wondering how they were going to pay for next month's medications. She thought about losing her apartment and having nowhere to live. She thought about all the nights she'd stayed awake worrying about money. Finally, she picked up the phone and dialed the lawyer's number. The lawyer's name was Mr. Peterson, and his voice was professional and calm. He explained how everything worked. His client, David Kim, was a businessman from South Korea who had started a successful tech company in Seattle. David needed to get permanent residency in the United States to expand his business, but the immigration process was taking too long. A marriage would speed things up considerably. "It's completely legal," Mr. Peterson assured her. "Many people enter into marriages of convenience. You would live separate lives. After 2 years, once Mr. Kim receives his permanent residency, you would divorce. It's a business arrangement, nothing more." Amy asked about the money. Mr. Peterson confirmed it was $50,000, paid in full after the wedding ceremony. There would also be a monthly allowance of $2,000 to help with living expenses, since they would technically be married, and might need to show some evidence of a shared life if immigration officials asked questions. "What would I need to do?" Amy asked. "Very little. Attend a few meetings with Mr. Kim so you can get to know basic information about each other. Immigration officers sometimes ask spouses questions about their partner's background. Sign some paperwork. Have a simple wedding ceremony at City Hall, then live your life as you normally would." It sounded almost too good to be true. Amy made an appointment to meet with Mr. Peterson and David Kim the following week. When she told her mother about potentially getting some money to help with medical bills, she kept the details vague. Her mom was too sick to ask many questions, but Amy could see the relief in her eyes. The stress of owing so much money had been wearing on both of them. The meeting with David was at a coffee shop in downtown Seattle. Amy got there early and sat in a corner booth watching people come and go. She wasn't sure what to expect. When David walked in, he was exactly what she'd imagined a successful businessman would look like. Well-dressed, carrying a leather briefcase, checking his phone constantly. David sat down across from her and got straight to business. He was polite but distant. He explained his company and why he needed to stay in the United States. Amy told him about her situation with her mother's medical bills. They both agreed they were looking for a practical solution to their problems, nothing romantic or complicated. "I travel frequently for business," David said. "You would rarely see me. I have my own apartment. This arrangement would not interfere with your personal life in any way." They met one more time the following week to sign papers and go over some basic information about each other. David told her his favorite food, his birthday, where he went to college. Amy shared similar basic facts about herself. It felt like studying for a test rather than getting to know someone she was about to marry. The wedding was scheduled for the following month. Just a simple ceremony at City Hall with 2 witnesses that Mr. Peterson would provide. Amy would wear a regular dress, nothing fancy. David would wear a business suit. They would sign the marriage certificate, take a few photos for immigration purposes, and then go their separate ways. As the wedding date got closer, Amy found herself feeling nervous in ways she hadn't expected. Not because she was having second thoughts about the money or the arrangement, but because the whole thing felt so strange and empty. She'd always imagined that when she got married, it would be to someone she loved, someone who loved her back. Her wedding day would be one of the happiest days of her life. Instead, she was going to marry a stranger in a government building, pretend to smile for photos, and then probably not see him again for months. It wasn't how she'd pictured her life turning out. But sometimes life didn't go according to plan. Sometimes you had to do things you never thought you'd do just to survive. The night before the wedding, Amy packed a small bag with some personal items she wanted to take to her mother's house. She planned to spend a few days there after the ceremony, just to clear her head and figure out what came next. Her mother lived on a small ranch about 3 hours outside of Seattle, in a town where Amy had grown up before moving to the city for college and work. As she folded clothes into her bag, Amy tried to imagine what her life would be like in 2 years when all of this was over. Her mother would hopefully be healthy again. The medical bills would be paid off. Maybe she'd be teaching again. Or maybe she'd have found a completely different career. Maybe she'd even meet someone she actually wanted to marry for real. For now, though, she just had to get through tomorrow. One day at a time, just like everything else. 3 days before her wedding to David, Amy drove her old Honda down the familiar winding road toward home. The city disappeared behind her as mountains and forests took its place. She'd grown up in this small town called Pine Valley, but it had been months since she'd visited. Every time she came back, it felt like stepping into a different world. Her mother's ranch sat at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by fields where cattle grazed peacefully. The house was small, but comfortable, built by Amy's grandfather 50 years ago. When Amy pulled into the driveway, she could see her mother through the kitchen window, moving slowly but steadily around the room. "There's my girl," her mother said when Amy walked through the front door. Despite being sick, Mom always tried to sound cheerful when Amy visited. "I wasn't expecting you until next week. I had some free time and wanted to see how you're doing," Amy said, giving her mother a careful hug. Mom had lost weight during the treatments, but she seemed stronger than the last time Amy had seen her. They spent the afternoon catching up and walking around the property. Amy helped her mother feed the few chickens they kept and checked on the vegetable garden. It was peaceful here in a way that the city never was. No traffic, no crowds, just the sound of wind through the trees and birds singing. That evening, Amy drove into town to pick up groceries and her mother's medications from the pharmacy. Pine Valley's main street looked exactly the same as it had when she was in high school. The same diner, The same hardware store, the same bank. Some of the storefronts were empty now, but the ones that remained seemed frozen in time. Amy parked in front of Miller's Diner and went inside. The place was busy for a Tuesday night, filled with ranchers and their families having dinner. Amy recognized some faces but couldn't remember names. She'd been gone for 8 years, first for college, and then for work in the city. She ordered a sandwich to go and sat at the counter waiting for her food. That's when she heard someone say her name. "Amy Rodriguez, is that really you?" She turned around and felt her heart skip a beat. Standing behind her was Jake Thompson, looking almost exactly like he had in high school, just taller and more muscular. His dark hair was longer now and his hands were rougher from years of outdoor work. But his smile was the same one that had made her fall in love with him when she was 17. "Jake," she said, standing up to give him a hug. "What are you doing here? I thought you left town years ago." "I did for a while," he said, sitting down on the stool next to her. "Worked ranches in Montana and Wyoming for about 5 years, but I came back last year when my dad got hurt. Someone needed to run the family ranch." Amy remembered Jake's family had always struggled financially. His father worked hard, but never seemed to get ahead. When they were dating in high school, Jake had talked about leaving Pine Valley and seeing the world. It surprised her that he'd come back. "What about you?" Jake asked. "I heard you became a teacher in Seattle." "That's great." Amy felt her stomach tighten. She couldn't exactly tell him the truth about why she was here, or what she was planning to do in 3 days. "Yeah, I'm teaching," she said vaguely. "Just taking some time off to spend with Mom while she recovers from her treatments." Jake's expression became serious. "I heard about your mom getting sick. I'm really sorry. How is she doing?" "Better," Amy said. "The doctors think she's going to be okay." They talked for another hour, catching up on old friends and sharing stories about their lives since high school. Jake told her about working on different ranches, learning everything he could about raising cattle and managing land. Amy told him about her college years and teaching, though she left out the part about losing her job and all the financial problems. Being with Jake felt comfortable and familiar in a way that surprised her. They'd broken up when she left for college, and it had been painful for both of them. Jake had wanted her to stay in Pine Valley and build a life there together. Amy had wanted to see what else was out there in the world. Neither of them had been willing to compromise, so they'd ended things rather than try a long-distance relationship. Now, sitting in the same diner where they'd had their first date, Amy found herself remembering all the things she'd loved about Jake. He was kind and funny with a way of listening that made her feel like everything she said mattered. He'd always been the most genuine person she knew. When Amy's food was ready, Jake walked her out to her car. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky pink and orange. "It's really good to see you," Jake said. "Are you going to be in town for a while?" "Just a few days," Amy said. "I have to get back to Seattle soon." "Well, maybe we could have dinner tomorrow night. There's a new place that opened up about 20 minutes from here. Nothing fancy, but the food's supposed to be good." Amy hesitated. Getting involved with Jake again, even as friends, felt complicated. Her life was already messy enough. But looking at him standing there in the golden evening light, she couldn't bring herself to say no. "That sounds nice," she said. The next day, Amy spent the morning helping her mother around the house and trying not to think about her upcoming wedding to David. Every time her phone rang, she worried it might be Mr. Peterson, with some last-minute details she needed to handle. But the day stayed quiet. That afternoon, her mother took a nap, and Amy found herself walking around the ranch property. She ended up at her favorite spot from childhood, a big oak tree on a hill that overlooked the valley. She used to come here when she needed to think or when she was upset about something. Sitting under the tree, Amy tried to sort through her feelings. Tomorrow she would drive back to Seattle and marry a man she barely knew. It was the right thing to do, the practical thing, but being back home, seeing Jake again, reminded her of a different kind of life she could have had. When Jake picked her up that evening, he was wearing a clean shirt and had obviously made an effort to look nice. It touched Amy that he still cared about making a good impression on her, even after all these years. The restaurant he'd chosen was small and cozy, the kind of place where the waitress knew everyone's name and their usual order. Jake and Amy sat by a window that looked out over farmland stretching to the horizon. During dinner, their conversation flowed easily. Jake told her about the challenges of running his family's ranch and his plans for improving it. Amy found herself talking more openly about her life than she had with anyone in months. She told him about how much she'd loved teaching and how hard it had been to watch her mother go through cancer treatments. "You seem worried about something," Jake said gently. "Is everything okay?" Amy looked at him across the table, this man who had known her better than anyone when they were young. She wanted to tell him everything, about the medical bills, about David, about the wedding that was supposed to happen the day after tomorrow. But she couldn't find the words. "Just stressed about Mom and everything," she said instead. After dinner, Jake drove her home the long way, down back roads that wound through the countryside. They talked about their high school friends and what had happened to everyone. Some had stayed in Pine Valley and started families. Others had left and never come back, just like Amy had. When they reached her mother's house, Jake walked her to the front door. For a moment, they stood there looking at each other, and Amy felt like she was 18 again, saying goodnight after a date. "I'm glad you're back, even if it's just for a few days," Jake said softly. "Me too," Amy said, and she meant it. That night, Amy lay awake in her childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would drive back to Seattle and marry David. She would get the money she needed to pay her mother's medical bills and keep her apartment. It was the right decision. So, why did it feel so wrong? Amy woke up on her wedding day feeling sick to her stomach. Not the excited, nervous kind of sick that brides are supposed to feel, but the deep, heavy kind that comes from knowing you're about to do something that feels completely wrong. She was supposed to drive back to Seattle in 2 hours to meet David at City Hall. Her simple blue dress was hanging in the closet, and her car was packed with her overnight bag. Everything was ready. So why couldn't she make herself get out of bed? Her mother was already up, moving around the kitchen and humming softly to herself. Amy found her making pancakes, something she hadn't done since before she got sick. "You seem to have more energy today," Amy said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "I do feel better," her mother said, flipping a pancake. "Dr. Martinez thinks the treatments are really working. My last blood test showed improvement." Amy should have felt happy hearing this news, but instead it made her feel worse. Her mother was getting better, which was wonderful, but Amy was still about to marry a stranger for money. Even if her mother recovered completely, they would still owe thousands of dollars in medical bills. "Sweetheart, you've seemed troubled since you got here," her mother said, sitting down across from Amy with a plate of pancakes. "Is everything all right?" Amy looked at her mother's concerned face and felt tears starting to form. She wanted to tell her everything, but she couldn't burden her mother with this. Mom had enough to worry about with her own health. "I'm just stressed about work and money," Amy said. "Things have been tight lately." "I know, honey. I'm sorry about that. I hate that my illness has caused you so many problems." "Mom, don't say that. It's not your fault you got sick." But Amy could see the guilt in her mother's eyes, and it made her feel even worse about what she was planning to do. After breakfast, Amy went for a walk around the property to clear her head. She ended up at the old oak tree again, the place where she'd always gone to think when she was growing up. She sat down in the shade and pulled out her phone to check the time. In 1 hour, she needed to start driving to Seattle. She was staring at her phone when she heard footsteps behind her. Jake was walking up the hill carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Your mom said I might find you here," he said, handing her one of the cups. "She seemed worried about you." Amy took the coffee gratefully. "What are you doing here? Don't you have work to do?" "The cattle can wait," Jake said, sitting down beside her under the tree. "You looked upset last night when I dropped you off, and you look even more upset today." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, drinking coffee and looking out over the valley. Amy had always felt peaceful in this spot, but today even her favorite place couldn't calm her nerves. "Jake," she said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if things had been different between us? If I had stayed here instead of going to college?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes," he said honestly, "but I never regretted encouraging you to go. You needed to see what else was out there. You would have always wondered if you'd stayed. And now I'm back and everything's a mess." Jake turned to look at her. "What kind of mess?" Amy stared at her coffee cup, trying to decide how much to tell him. She was tired of keeping secrets, tired of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. "The medical bills from Mom's cancer treatment," she said slowly. "They're destroying us financially. I lost my teaching job because I had to take too much time off to help her. I'm about to lose my apartment. I owe more money than I could make in years." Jake listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. "There's something else," Amy continued. "Something I haven't told anyone. I found a way to get the money we need, but it's not exactly normal." She told him about David, about the arrangement, about the wedding that was supposed to happen in 2 hours. Jake's face went through several emotions as she talked: surprise, concern, and something that might have been disappointment. When she finished, Jake was quiet for a long time. Amy worried that he thought she was crazy or desperate or both. $50,000, he said finally, plus $2,000 a month for expenses. It would solve everything. And after 2 years, you get divorced and go back to your regular life. That's the plan. Jake nodded slowly. "And this David guy, he seems trustworthy?" "His lawyer does. Everything's been very professional. It's just a business arrangement." Jake picked up a small stone and threw it down the hill. "Amy, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why not someone you actually know?" Amy looked at him confused. "What do you mean? If you're going to marry someone for practical reasons to solve a problem, why not marry someone who actually cares about you? Someone who cares about your mom and wants to help?" Amy felt her heart start beating faster. "Jake, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I've got money saved up from working ranches for 8 years. No debt, steady income from the family ranch now. I could pay your mom's medical bills today if you wanted me to." Amy stared at him. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking, I'm offering." Jake turned to face her completely. "Look, I know this sounds crazy. We haven't seen each other in years, and here I am talking about marriage, but Amy, I never stopped caring about you. Not once in 8 years. Jake, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not trying to pressure you or make this more complicated than it already is. I'm just saying that if you need to marry someone for money, why does it have to be a stranger? Why can't it be someone who would be honored to help you and your family?" Amy felt tears starting to fall. "Because that makes it so much more complicated. David and I have a contract, clear boundaries, no feelings involved. With you, there would be so many feelings involved. Would that be such a bad thing?" Amy looked at Jake sitting beside her, this man who had always been honest and kind, who had loved her when they were young and apparently still cared about her now. Marrying him would solve her financial problems just as effectively as marrying David, but it would also mean opening her heart to the possibility of being hurt again. "What if it doesn't work out between us?" she asked. "What if we try to make it work and end up hating each other? At least with David, I know exactly what to expect." "And what if it does work out?" Jake asked. "What if we figure out how to be happy together?" Amy closed her eyes and tried to imagine it, coming home to Jake every day instead of to an empty apartment, working together to build a life instead of just getting through each day, having someone who truly cared about her well-being instead of just fulfilling a contract. "I'm supposed to be in Seattle in an hour," she said quietly. "You don't have to be anywhere you don't want to be," Jake said. Amy opened her eyes and looked at him. "If we did this, it wouldn't be fair to you. I'd be marrying you for money, just like I was going to marry David for money." "No," Jake said firmly. "You'd be marrying me because I love you and want to help you. There's a difference." The word love hung in the air between them. Amy felt something shifting inside her, like a door she'd kept locked for years was finally opening. "You love me?" she asked. "I've loved you since we were 17 years old," Jake said simply. "I loved you when you left for college, I loved you while you were gone. I love you now." Amy started crying harder, not from sadness but from relief. Relief that someone cared about her this much. Relief that she didn't have to go through with marrying a stranger. Relief that maybe, just maybe, she could have both the help she needed and someone who truly loved her. "What would we tell people?" she asked through her tears. "The truth. That we realized we still love each other and decided to get married. And the money for Mom's bills? A wedding gift from her new son-in-law." Amy laughed despite her tears. It was crazy and impulsive and completely different from the careful, practical plan she'd made with David. But it felt right in a way that marrying David never had. "Jake, are you absolutely sure about this? Because once we do it, there's no going back." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Jake said, taking her hand. "The question is, are you sure?" Amy looked down at their joined hands, then up at Jake's face. He was looking at her with such hope and love that it took her breath away. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'm sure." Amy's hands were shaking as she dialed Mr. Peterson's number. Jake sat beside her on the porch swing, holding her free hand for support. They'd walked back to the house together, and Amy had told her mother everything. About David, about the arrangement, and about Jake's offer. Her mother had cried with relief and given Jake the biggest hug she could manage. "Mr. Peterson's office," the secretary answered. "This is Amy Rodriguez. I need to speak with Mr. Peterson immediately about the wedding today." "Please hold." Amy waited, her heart pounding. Jake squeezed her hand encouragingly. "Miss Rodriguez." Mr. Peterson's voice came on the line, sounding slightly annoyed. "You're cutting it rather close. The ceremony is in 2 hours. That's why I'm calling. I can't go through with it. I need to cancel the wedding." There was a long pause. "Miss Rodriguez, I'm afraid that's not how these arrangements work. Mr. Kim has already made considerable preparations. He's expecting to meet you at City Hall in 2 hours. I understand that, and I'm sorry for the short notice, but I can't marry him. Something's come up." "May I ask what's come up that's more important than honoring your commitment?" Amy looked at Jake, who nodded encouragingly. "I'm marrying someone else instead." Another pause, longer this time. "Miss Rodriguez, if you're having second thoughts about the arrangement, perhaps we could discuss." "No," Amy said firmly. "There's nothing to discuss. I'm not coming to Seattle today. Please tell David I'm sorry, but the wedding is canceled." "You realize you'll forfeit the deposit? And that Mr. Kim may have legal recourse for breach of contract?" Amy felt a moment of panic. She hadn't thought about legal consequences. But Jake squeezed her hand again, reminding her she wasn't alone. "I understand," she said. "I'll take that risk." After she hung up, Amy felt both relieved and terrified. She just walked away from $50,000 and potentially made herself liable for a lawsuit, but she'd also freed herself from marrying a stranger. "So," Jake said with a small smile, "want to get married today?" Amy laughed, feeling a little hysterical. "Is that really possible? Don't we need a license and everything? The courthouse in Pine Valley is open until 5. We can get a license and have Judge Williams marry us today if we want." "Judge Williams is still alive." "Very much so. He married my sister last year." They spent the next hour making phone calls and arrangements. Amy called the courthouse to make sure they could get a marriage license on short notice. Jake called Judge Williams, who was delighted to hear from him and agreed to perform the ceremony that afternoon. Amy's mother insisted on coming with them, despite Amy's protests that she should rest. "I'm not missing my daughter's wedding," she said firmly. "I've been waiting years for you two to figure out you belong together." The courthouse in Pine Valley was a small brick building that also housed the post office and the sheriff's department. Amy felt nervous walking in, but it was a different kind of nervous than she'd felt that morning. This time she was nervous because she was about to marry someone she loved, someone who loved her back. The marriage license process was surprisingly simple. They filled out some paperwork, showed their identification, and paid a small fee. The site clerk, Mrs. Henderson, had been working there since Amy was in high school. "Amy Rodriguez," Mrs. Henderson said with a big smile. "I remember you from when you were little. And Jake Thompson, your mother is going to be so happy to hear about this." Judge Williams arrived a few minutes later, wearing a regular suit instead of his judicial robes. He was a kind man in his 70s, who had known both Jake and Amy since they were children. "Well, this is a nice surprise," he said, shaking both their hands. "I always thought you two would end up together eventually." The ceremony was simple and quick, nothing like the elaborate wedding Amy had sometimes dreamed about when she was younger. But standing there in the small courthouse with Jake, holding his hands while Judge Williams read the traditional vows, Amy felt more sure about what she was doing than she had about anything in years. When Judge Williams asked if she would take Jake to be her husband, Amy looked into Jake's eyes and said, "I do," with complete certainty. When he asked Jake the same question, Jake's voice was steady and clear as he said, "I do" back. "By the power invested in me by the state, I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Williams said with a warm smile. "Jake, you may kiss your bride." Jake leaned down and kissed Amy gently, and she felt like everything in her life was finally falling into place. After the ceremony, they went to the bank so Jake could transfer money to pay Amy's mother's medical bills. The amount he transferred was exactly what they owed. He'd asked her mother for the exact figure while Amy was on the phone with Mr. Peterson. "I can't believe you're doing this," Amy said as they sat in the bank manager's office, signing paperwork. "We're married now," Jake said simply. "Your problems are my problems." That evening, they had a small celebration dinner at Amy's mother's house. Jake's sister Kelly came over with her husband and kids, and a few neighbors stopped by when they heard the news. It felt like the whole town was happy for them. But as the evening went on and people started leaving, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Amy and Jake were married now, but they hadn't really talked about the practical details of what that meant. "I should probably go home and pack some things," Amy said as they cleaned up dishes. "I guess I'll need to give notice on my apartment in Seattle." "Actually," Jake said, "we should talk about that, about where we're going to live and how this is all going to work." They sat down at the kitchen table after Amy's mother went to bed. It felt strange being married to Jake but not really knowing what their daily life together would look like. "I know this all happened really fast," Jake said, "and I don't want you to feel like I have expectations about anything. We can take things as slow as you want." Amy appreciated that he was being considerate, but it also made her realize how complicated their situation was. They were legally married, but they were essentially strangers in some ways. They'd known each other as teenagers, but they were different people now. "Where would we live?" Amy asked. "I mean, I assume you'd want me to move here, but I've been living in the city for so long." "We could figure that out," Jake said. "Maybe you could try living here for a while and see how you like it. If you hate it, we could look at other options." "What about work?" "I can't exactly be a teacher here. The school only has about 50 kids total. The county school system is bigger, or there might be other opportunities. We don't have to solve everything tonight." Over the next few weeks, Amy discovered that being married to Jake was both easier and harder than she'd expected. The easy part was that they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Jake was funny and kind, and he made her laugh every day. The hard part was figuring out how to build a real relationship while living together as husband and wife. They started out sleeping in separate bedrooms, which felt awkward but practical. Jake was respectful of her space and never pressured her for physical intimacy, but Amy could feel the tension between them. They were attracted to each other, but neither wanted to rush into anything. Amy found a job teaching at the county high school about 30 minutes away. It wasn't the same as her job in Seattle, but she discovered she liked working in a smaller school, where she got to know all the students personally. Jake was patient as Amy adjusted to ranch life. He taught her how to help with the cattle and how to fix fences. Amy was surprised to find she enjoyed the physical work and being outdoors every day. The biggest challenge was dealing with Amy's feelings of guilt and confusion. She'd married Jake to solve a financial problem, even though he insisted he'd married her because he loved her. Sometimes she worried that she was taking advantage of his kindness. Other times she wondered if she'd made a huge mistake by turning her back on her life in the city. 3 months after their wedding, Amy's mother had a follow-up appointment with her oncologist. The news was better than they'd hoped. The cancer was completely gone, and the doctor said she was in remission. That night, as they celebrated with cake and champagne, Amy found herself looking at Jake and feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Not just gratitude or friendship, but genuine love. Somewhere in the middle of learning to live together, she'd fallen in love with her husband. "Jake," she said as they sat on the porch after her mother had gone to bed, "can I tell you something? Always. I don't feel guilty anymore about marrying you for money." Jake looked surprised. "Why not?" "Because I didn't marry you for money. I married you because you asked me the right question at the right time. You made me realize that I could choose love instead of just choosing survival." Jake reached over and took her hand. "And now?" "Now I choose love every day," Amy said. "I choose you every day." That night, for the first time since their wedding, Amy didn't go to the guest bedroom. She went to the room she shared with her husband, and they talked until dawn about their future together. It wasn't the life Amy had planned, but it was turning out to be better than anything she could have imagined. 8 months after their wedding, Amy woke up to find Jake sitting on the edge of their bed already dressed for work, but not making any move to leave. Something about the way he was sitting perfectly still and staring out the window made her stomach drop. "Jake, what's wrong?" He turned to look at her and she could see tears in his eyes. "Your mom's in the hospital. Kelly called a few minutes ago. She went over to check on her this morning and found her unconscious." Amy felt the world tilt sideways. Her mother had been doing so well lately. The doctors had said she was in complete remission. They'd all started to believe the worst was behind them. "What happened?" Amy asked, already getting out of bed and reaching for clothes. "They don't know yet. The ambulance took her to County General. Kelly's meeting us there." The drive to the hospital felt like it took forever, even though Jake drove faster than Amy had ever seen him drive. She kept thinking about all the conversations she'd meant to have with her mother, all the things she'd planned to do with her when she got completely better. At the hospital, they found Kelly in the waiting room, pacing back and forth. She hugged Amy tightly when she saw her. "The doctor says her body went into shock," Kelly explained. "Sometimes after cancer treatment, even when the cancer is gone, the body just gets overwhelmed. They're doing everything they can." For the next 3 days, Amy barely left her mother's bedside. Jake stayed with her, bringing her food and coffee, holding her when she cried, never once complaining about sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs. Amy's mother was unconscious most of the time, but occasionally she would wake up for a few minutes. During one of these moments, she grabbed Amy's hand and squeezed it weakly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You found your way back to happiness." "Don't talk like you're saying goodbye," Amy said, crying. "You're going to be fine. We're going to have years together." Her mother smiled. "Maybe. But if we don't, I want you to know that watching you and Jake together these past few months has been the greatest gift. You two are meant for each other." Amy wanted to argue, to insist, that her mother would recover just like she had from the cancer, but something in her mother's eyes told her that this time was different. On the 4th day, Amy's mother passed away peacefully, with Amy holding one hand and Jake holding the other. Amy had never felt pain like the moment she realized her mother was gone. All the money in the world, all the medical treatments, all their hopes and plans, none of it had been enough. Jake held Amy as she sobbed, and he cried with her. Her mother had become like a second mother to him during the months they'd lived together. He'd grown to love her gentle wisdom and her fierce love for Amy. The funeral was small but meaningful. Everyone in Pine Valley came to pay their respects. Amy's mother had been beloved in the community, always ready to help a neighbor or bring food to someone who was sick. People shared stories about her kindness and her strength, and Amy realized how lucky she'd been to have her as a mother. After the funeral, Amy fell into a deep depression. She stopped going to work, stopped helping with the ranch, stopped doing much of anything except sitting in her mother's empty house and crying. Jake was patient with her grief, but Amy could see the worry in his eyes. "I don't know how to do this without her," Amy told Jake one evening as they sat in her mother's kitchen. "She was the only family I had left." "You have me now," Jake said gently. "We're family." Amy looked at him. This man who had changed his whole life to help her, And her mother. But what if I only married you because I was desperate? What if now that Mom's gone, there's no reason for us to stay together? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Is that what you think? That the only reason we got married was to help your mom? I don't know what to think anymore, Amy said honestly. Everything happened so fast. Mom getting sick, losing my job, meeting you again, getting married. I feel like I haven't had time to figure out what I actually want. Then take the time, Jake said. I'm not going anywhere. Over the next few weeks, Amy spent a lot of time alone, walking around the ranch property and trying to sort through her feelings. She missed her mother terribly, but slowly she began to realize that her grief was making her forget about all the good things in her life. She had a job she enjoyed, teaching kids who looked up to her. She lived in a beautiful place surrounded by mountains and forests, and she was married to a man who loved her unconditionally, who had proven over and over again that he would do anything for her. One morning, Amy woke up and realized she hadn't just been grieving her mother's death. She'd been grieving the loss of the future she'd imagined when her mother recovered. She'd pictured years of family dinners, grandchildren for her mother to spoil, holidays spent together. Losing those dreams had been almost as hard as losing her mother. But she was starting to understand that she could still have a beautiful future, just a different one than she'd planned. That evening, Amy found Jake in the barn, fixing a broken gate. He looked up when she came in, searching her face for signs of how she was feeling. Jake, she said, I need to tell you something important. He set down his tools and gave her his full attention. Okay. I've been thinking about what I said the other night, about not knowing why we got married. And I realized I was wrong. Jake waited for her to continue. We didn't get married just to help my mom, even though that's how it started. We got married because you saw me drowning and you offered to save me, not just financially, but emotionally. You reminded me that I deserved to be loved. Amy, let me finish, she said, stepping closer to him. I love you, Jake. Not because you helped me when I needed it, but because of who you are. You're kind and generous and patient. You make me laugh even when I'm sad. You believe in me even when I don't believe in myself. Jake reached up and touched her face gently. I love you too. I have since we were kids, and I love you even more now. I want to have a real wedding, Amy said suddenly. I know we're already married, but I want to celebrate it properly. I want to wear a white dress and have our friends there and promise to love you in front of everyone. Jake smiled, the first real smile Amy had seen from him since her mother died. Are you asking me to marry you again? I'm asking if you want to renew our vows. Do it right this time. Not because we need to solve a problem, but because we choose each other. Yes, Jake said, pulling her into his arms. I would love to marry you again. They planned the ceremony for the following spring, a year after their first wedding. Amy wore her grandmother's wedding dress, which her mother had saved for years. Jake wore a new suit and boots that actually matched. They held the ceremony outside on the ranch under the same oak tree where Jake had asked her why she wouldn't marry someone she actually knew. All their friends and neighbors came, including Mrs. Henderson from the courthouse and Judge Williams, who performed the ceremony again. Kelly was Amy's maid of honor, and Jake's best friend from high school was his best man. When Judge Williams asked if Amy would take Jake to be her husband, she looked out at all the people who had supported them through the hardest year of their lives, then looked at Jake, who was crying happy tears. I do, she said, and this time she meant it with her whole heart. After the ceremony, they had a barbecue reception in the backyard. There was dancing and laughter and toast to the happy couple. Amy's mother wasn't there in person, but Amy felt her presence everywhere. Late that night, after all the guests had gone home, Amy and Jake sat on their porch swing, still in their wedding clothes. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd gone through with marrying David? Amy asked. Sometimes, Jake said, but I try not to think about it too much. I prefer this reality. Me too, Amy said, snuggling closer to him. I can't believe. I almost chose a life without love in it. You were doing what you thought you had to do to survive. There's no shame in that. But you showed me there was another option. You asked me why I wouldn't choose someone I actually knew. Someone who actually cared about me. Best question I ever asked, Jake said, kissing the top of her head. 2 years later, Amy and Jake were sitting in the same spot, watching their 1-year-old daughter play in the yard. Little Maria had her father's dark hair and her mother's determined spirit. Look at her go, Amy said, laughing as Maria chased after one of the barn cats. She's going to be running this ranch before she can properly walk. Takes after her mom, Jake said. Strong-willed and knows what she wants. Amy thought about the person she'd been 3 years ago, desperate and scared and willing to marry a stranger for money. That woman felt like a different person entirely. She'd found her way back to love, back to family, back to a life that felt meaningful and full. Sometimes she wondered what had happened to David, the businessman she'd stood up at City Hall. She'd heard through Mr. Peterson's office that he'd found someone else to marry and had gotten his permanent residency. She hoped he was happy wherever he was. As for Amy, she couldn't imagine being happier. She had a husband who loved her, a daughter who filled their home with laughter, work that she found fulfilling, and a community that felt like extended family. She'd learned that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the right answer is the one that scares.